What's the hardest would you rather question you've ever been asked? Story number 1. Verizon's call center hiring process included a questionnaire. Unlike most questionnaires where there is an obvious answer, Verizon had a list of would you rather questions with no discernible upside. Would you rather work longer hours or deal with unruly customers sort of choices? Anyway, I passed every part of their hiring process except that, which they stated made me immediately ineligible for hire because of the questionnaire. I feel like I dodged a bullet, though. I suspect it is a variable answer set depending on what they needed. Management would send HR what they were looking for, and HR would key in the desired responses. Short-staffed answer A. Someone who doesn't mind overtime getting beat up on call reviews. B. And plan on cutting weak reps once staffing won't be dire afterwards. Story number 2. I'm not sure about the toughest one, but the one that made me and my friends think the most was. Every toilet you now use becomes sentient, and I mean fully sentient. It can talk, feel emotion, the whole 9 yards. There is no loophole to avoid this scenario. No matter where you are, the toilet is sentient. The question is, would you rather the toilet be a very willing participant or a very unwilling one? The willing toilet gets off on this shit literally. Every time you drop a deuce, it's an orgasmic experience for the toilet. And remember, he's sentient, so he is very vocal about how he's feeling. Nothing rocks his world like you dropping a post-Chipotle dump in his mouth. The non-willing toilet is basically a hostage. He's horrified by what you're doing to him. He goes through the entire range of emotion a typical hostage goes through. There's fear, distress, and bargaining. When the deed is about to be done, he's revolted. When you actually go, I mean hell, how do you feel if someone was forcefully shitting in your mouth? For both scenarios, we can assume that the toilet can only talk to you and other people can't hear them. This takes out the issue of going in a public place. So which would you pick? The initial instinct is for sure the willing participant, but the more I think about it, I think you'd eventually grow disgusted with them and be creeped out. Personally, I'm hoping for a Stockholm Syndrome scenario with the hostage toilet so that eventually we can come to coexist. Story number 3. When my friend's daughter was 8 or 9, she was obsessed with asking random, would you rather type questions from a book she bought. It was a kid's book, so it was nothing NSFW, just random stuff. Like would you rather eat only pizza or only ice cream, harmless things like that. So one night, while I was out to dinner with her and her mother, she asked me, Uncle, would you rather be a door or a window? I thought it over for a moment and for no particular reason said, I guess I'd rather be a window. Without missing a beat, she goes, you seem more like a door to me. Then flat refused to explain why, haunts me to this day. Story number 4. Would you rather be blind or deaf? It seems like an easy choice to say deaf, since it would seem to be much less difficult to navigate the world being deaf than blind, but I once had a blind friend who was not born blind and had only become so around age 17. Who told me she'd still rather be blind than deaf because being deaf sounded very lonely. I still think about that conversation sometimes. Story number 5. The hardest would you rather question I've ever been asked is, would you rather have a lifelong partner who is completely loyal to you or a lifelong friend who is always honest with you? Loyalty and honesty are both important qualities in a relationship, but they can sometimes conflict with each other. For example, if your partner is completely loyal to you, they may not be honest with you about their feelings or thoughts if they think it might upset you. On the other hand, if your friend is always honest with you, they may not always be there for you when you need them the most. This question forces you to choose between two important things in a relationship. Do you want someone who will always be there for you even if they're not always honest with you? Or do you want someone who is always honest with you? Even if they're not always there for you, there's no right or wrong answer to this question, but it's definitely not an easy one to answer. What's a story you're dying to tell? Story number 1. I was walking down the street in Sag Harbor, New York, the Hamptons. I lit my cigarette and this guy asks me for a light. He is dressed down, kinda rough looking. We talk until we finish smoking. and he invites me into an expensive bar for a drink. He buys me a $25 glass of cognac, only about 1/4 inch full, and introduces me to his wife and friend, some famous artist. We have a few drinks and swap stories. He had sailed his boat from Connecticut, and the water was too rough to return. His son and daughter-in-law had to be back home for work the next morning, so he had his helicopter pick him up. We all went to a haunted house, they smoked a bowl, and we returned to the bar. Turns out this guy is a mobster and rich as fuck. We go out for another cigarette, and a bus pulls up with 3 attractive women with baggage. The mobster invites them in for drinks and tries to get me laid. The hottest of the girls was shocked that I didn't know who she was. She claimed to be an actress, so I asked what movie she was in. She says, "Money talks." I check IMDb, and she is not listed. I then remember that there is a porn with the same title. She was a porn star. I personally racked up a $1,200 bar tab that night, all of which the mobster insisted in paying for. I cabbed it back to the house I was staying at and called it a night. I never heard back from any of the group. Story number 2. When my best friend and I went backpacking in Europe, we had just left Oktoberfest in Munich and got on the night train to Paris. In the mix of things, we accidentally switched tickets. I found my cabin with 5 quiet Asian travelers, and we all went to sleep pretty much right after the train started to go. After the heavy amount of partying that took place, that sleep was one of the best ones that I've had. I woke up in the morning feeling refreshed and went to look for my friend a few cabins away. But she was gone. After locating her and seeing how much she looked like shit, she proceeded to tell me that her cabin was made up of 5 drunk French men, 5 very drunk French men. They had a good 1 to 2 hours of being rowdy and loud for a while, then things finally started to quiet down in the cabin. In the middle of the night, my friend felt someone smack her head. She thought it was the very burly drunk men sleeping in the bunk right across from hers, and just moved farther back into the bunk towards the wall, when someone smacked her head again. She lifts her head up and something falls off. She touches it and it's poo. The 250-pound man was shitting his pants and throwing poo at her in his drunken sleep. She screamed, ran out of the bunk, and found someone that works on the train. The woman laughed at her and directed her to the bathroom, where the sink's water pressure was equivalent to the water pressure of something with low water pressure. I can't think of a clever analogy right now. She refused to go back to the bunk, had to go find an empty seat for the duration of the train ride. Story number 3. When I was 15, I moved to Utah. It was a smaller town just north of Salt Lake City and far enough west that the wind would carry in the smell of the lake and the air would reek of spoiled sea. I got dropped halfway into sophomore year, which was terrible for an awkward kid in a new place because in Utah they began high school with sophomore year, so I was effectively a freshman twice. The only luck I had was a girl I had met named Sarah, and we started dating right at the end of the school year, so we were able to spend a majority of the summer together. Now, you might not know this about Mormons, and I certainly hadn't, but in their church they really like big families, something about spirits in heaven requiring bodies. So it wasn't uncommon for some of the more devout Mormon families to have 8, 9, or more kids. It really just meant outdoor freezers packed with hamburger helper and houses with bigger kitchens. Sarah's family was pretty Mormon, and my family didn't practice much of any religion, so we just never discussed it. She had 6 sisters, 7 in total including her, ranging from 6 years old to 18. I only met her mom once, and she was always pregnant, and I never spoke with her dad. I was a little too overwhelmed by meeting her family, and I avoided it. I probably would have figured it out then, but I had only lived in Utah for 6 months, and everything already seemed so weird to me. I remember a particular night I had picked her up. She had a curfew that made it so I had to park down the street so she could sneak out. I wanted to jump over a small gully flanked by trees beside her house, but she refused and we had to walk around, which meant passing by her parents' window. I thought it was weird, but I just assumed she was worried she might get her feet wet. It went like that for a couple months. I would stop down the street and I would wait while she walked beside the gully, around her house, and up the street to meet me. Sometimes I'd meet her at the road, but I was always careful not to walk too far onto the lawn, for fear I'd wake her parents. One night it was raining, and I didn't want her to walk alone through the dark in the rain, so I had planned on surprising her by meeting her by the back door she snuck out through. To save time and avoid walking by the window, I walked through the trees to the gully. The water was a bit higher and moving quicker than normal because of the rain runoff, but I figured I could make the jump. Man, I was wrong. My feet landed in the mud on the other side, but I sank immediately in the wet earth and splashed backwards hard into the muck. The rush of cold water was a shock, and I reached up and grabbed a storm drain. But what I had grabbed dislodged and flowed down with me. The water wasn't very deep, maybe 2 or 3 feet, so I stuck my shoes in it and stood up still, holding what turned out to be a black garbage bag. I dropped it and started to crawl up, and my hand landed on another black garbage bag. I tried to crawl up, but they kept dislodging in the slick viscous grime. It must have been the 3rd or 4th time. I tried to find something to grip onto when I accidentally tore one open. At first I thought it was a rotten orange, black and decaying, among a spoiled nest of old bones. But I could just make it out, yellowed skin bloated on the white bone. It was a skull, tiny a baby's. I let out a shout. I didn't know what else to do. It smelled awful, and I had an overwhelming urge to get away from it. Quickly, I scrambled up through the mud and kicked myself up against a tree, my heart racing. Sarah was there. She was crying. She had been waiting for me by the street and came over. When she heard me shout, she must have always known. I never saw her again, and all the girls were pulled out of school. The local news reports said that her father had decided he had enough kids and had been burying each newborn out by the gully. But they recovered 5 tiny bodies, all girls, and I wonder if he had just been waiting for a son. Story number 4. When I was a freshman in high school, I showed up one day and almost everyone was silent. I asked a few friends what was going on, and apparently a girl, senior, died in a car accident. I felt kinda sad to see so many people mourning, but really just didn't let it bother me. The name sounded familiar, but I didn't think anything of it because I already hear so many names. I go to my first period, and the announcements come on, and the principal says a few words about the girl. One of her friends in front of me cries. My second period is English, and my teacher, who I hated, has been crying, saying that she really cares about us, etc. She had the girl as a student. I can't really remember third period, but fourth period is piano. I go to my piano class, and I see my guidance counselor in the window. Out of 10 students, 6 are seniors. I go in and sit down at my usual seat. My guidance counselor is crying, of course, and saying that she is going through all of the girls' classes to comfort students. That's when I stopped and looked around. No one was absent except for the girl who was supposed to be next to me, the girl who always complained about her job at Panera. Helped me with songs I was trying to learn, shared music with me, read the papers I wrote. I never even took the time to learn her name. I felt horrible. People were just looking at me for crying out of nowhere. I'm usually pretty emotionless when it comes to these kinds of things, but at that moment, I realized what the hell was going on and who had died, and felt genuinely sad to the point of tears. What's the worst thing you've seen at work? Story number 1. I once provided care for a man with dementia that often led to him being paranoid. His brother, an ex-police officer, was stealing from him. He would pick up his pension but steal about 10 to 20% of it each time. When the gentleman I cared for called his brother out on it, his brother would always blame his dementia for his suspicions and then guilt-trip him into apologizing for doubting him. Eventually, we were asked to collect his pension instead of his brother after his brother refused to provide a full paper trail of his pension and to deliver the money in the sealed envelope. It's given in at the office. His brother kicked off big time trying to get us to stop providing care so he could keep exploiting him. We stood our ground, duty of care above all else, and our man got the pension he earned through his life in full. I saw lots of other messed up stuff in that job, but there's something about a man's older brother exploiting and emotionally gaslighting him which just hits hard. Story number 2. Worked in search and rescue almost 10 years ago. We entered a building in an area that had been recently shelled quite heavily, and it was in rough shape. The apartments on the lower levels had been completely shredded, and while the upstairs apartments looked okay on the inside, there were huge cracks in the walls and floors of the building, and everything you touched or stepped on erupted in a cloud of dust. Power was out, plumbing was shot to shit, with leaks all over the place. The people inside needed relocating somewhere safe. We could hear screaming from I think the third floor, but as we moved upwards it was getting fainter and fainter, gradually reducing into a kind of wailing, sobbing sound. We eventually find the apartment it's coming from, and on the other side of the door is a kid maybe 6 to 7 years old, crouched under a table, hands over his ears, and there is blood everywhere. It's on the floors, all over the tabletop, there's arcs of it spattered up the walls. We had no idea what to expect. Then we went around the corner into the kitchen and found the mother. She was slumped on the floor, still weakly sobbing, with both of her hands amputated on the floor next to her. She was trying to clutch her bleeding stumps in some bedsheets and an old towel. Her injuries were nothing to do with direct exposure to the conflict. Her husband had allegedly caught her with evidence of infidelity, severed both of her hands in rage, and then fled the scene. He had been radicalized into local extremist groups, and as soon as the situation in the city turned truly ugly, he left her there to die. Story number 3. Trigger warning, ESSA. I saw the aftermath, so to speak. I was a CNA working in a large nursing home. I was filling in for a couple days on a floor I didn't usually work on. So I did my stuff to each patient on this floor. None of the patients could talk or move on their own. I cleaned up one elderly lady and noticed she didn't have pubic hair. Where I would normally expect to see it, it was missing around her actual genitals. I thought it was weird, and I also noticed her genital area was reddened. I figured she'd had some sort of issue, and that's why it didn't look right. About an hour later, the head nurse has me and other aides come into an office. She asks us if we noticed anything weird with any of the residents. One of the other CNAs said she noticed 2 different ladies had reddened genital areas. I was like, and I mentioned the patient I'd seen with it also. As you've probably guessed by now, a male CNA on the floor was patients, had to give a statement to police, and he was fired of course, but I don't know anything else, because I left to work at a facility closer to my home not long after this. Story number 4. Craned an old grain bin that was cemented into the concrete slab it was on. The bird shit, feathers, and carcasses made a firm floor about 2 feet deep. Inside were about 15 pigeons, who looked like they never seen the light of day. Some were too to fly, or too young. One was pink like bald and absolutely the offspring of multi-generational incest. They were all f***ed up. They couldn't get out because the only place to escape was the cap at the top, which is impossible for a bird to fly vertically through without messing up their flight on the roof sheets. I'm guessing they survived off of the grain left inside it and cannibalizing the dead. Most farmers in my experience air out the bins and leave ways for birds to escape before we show up to do work, but that was probably the nastiest farmyard I've been in. There were 7 other bins just like it in a row. Story number 5. 2 incidents at 2 different Walmart grocery distribution centers. The first, I got to work when they were wheeling out an inventory control co-worker of mine to an ambulance with blood everywhere. She had a forklift operator run through an intersection on the dry grocery side forks first and speared her leg with a fork up against the rack. She nearly died on the way to the hospital. The second was a banana room door that came down fast for the lifts to go through, or an employee to walk in, came down and sliced the nose off a quality control employee, resulting in an investigation that showed the doors company-wide were installed incorrectly. Story number 6. A guy at my old job got fired and asked if he could sit in my truck while he waited for a ride. I said yes because we were work friends. Well, his ride showed up and was waiting for him for like 15 minutes. So I went to my truck to see what he was doing. I opened the door to see him passed out with a needle in his arm. He came to and was very ashamed that he was shooting up in my truck. I honestly just felt bad for him. He was previously a recovering addict, but relapse got the better of him. I hope he's doing better now. Story number 7. I worked at a Goodwill for a few years. We had lots of drug addicts trying to shoot up in the changing room and had an occasional OD. But the most shocking thing I experienced was the amount of times people physically threatened or attacked me or my coworkers when we refused their donations. Getting in our faces and trying to push us around. One guy tried to hit someone with a car, another one threw a picture frame that narrowly missed smashing my supervisor's head. Another threw such a temper tantrum that he smashed an entire set of chairs and a kitchen table. There was also someone who called the police because we changed the prices on softcover books. Story number 8. A guy knew he was getting fired, so he took a shit in the trash can in his cubicle. Nobody knew if he did it there or took it into the bathroom to shit in it, but he did it one way or another. He got called up to HR and was let go. Then the people working in his area started complaining about the shit smell, and sure enough, I found it in his little trash can. Then I called him to ask about it, and he said it was an old burrito he forgot to throw out. It was not an old burrito he forgot to throw out. Story number 9. I was a head lifeguard instructor. The worst was probably a 15-year-old boy that dove of the diving board cracked his head open on the bottom of the pool, blood gushing, and was unconscious. My coworker and I had to do a deep water spinal rescue, which is basically the hardest rescue at a pool. The kid not only survived, but became a fellow lifeguard himself the next summer. What was your final you to a boss you didn't like? Story number 1. I had a shitty fast food job, making like $8 an hour in high school, and the new manager that the corporate owner brought in thought acted as if he was God himself. Nothing was ever good enough. Nobody could meet his standard. He could do no wrong. If you were on his good side, you would be spared, and he'd overlook your laziness. Dude was a low-key perv, letting the young high school girls come in late and leave early in exchange for hugs, and would always give them breaks. My final straw was when he literally stormed at me and called me into his office one day. Why were you just standing around instead of working? I was waiting for the fries to finish and it had maybe 30 seconds left on the timer. You use that time to restock 30 seconds, like yeah, let me just pull a Superman and restock the whole kitchen in 30 seconds. I told him I was going to college in the fall and couldn't work between the hours of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. I must have told him like 3 or 4 times. The next week's schedule came out Monday through Friday 9 to 5. I was like, I specially told you I'd be unavailable during those hours. He gorilla ripped the schedule off the wall and reposted the new one. I went from having a full schedule to 6 to 10 a.m. on Sunday. When the day finally came, I never showed up. I got a call from him at 4 p.m. acting almighty. Fuck that guy. I told him I quit and he was like, you cannot use me a reference. Story number 2. My boss and I never saw eye to eye, but we were both professionals and respectful to each other. After one weekend, my boss was very mad over something personal, and I had done one small mistake on my job, which I was fixing at the time my boss came to me. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, he starts yelling at me about what a failure I am, how I screwed up every job I did, which isn't true. Every other boss I've had, they've been very happy with my job. Well, I let that slide, thought that boss was just going through something bad in his personal life. But no, he kept doing this for me, for the rest of my shift, and suddenly he starts talking about how my parents have to be shitty in order for me to be here, how my parents failed at raising me, and how I should never exist in the first place. That was the moment I snapped. I grabbed my safety helmet and punched him real hard with it. When he fell down to the floor, I took my nail gun and I nailed him into the floor. I shot the nails through his clothes in such a way that he couldn't get up without any help. He started yelling how he will call the police and that I wouldn't ever work at construction again. Before leaving, I told him that I don't care because I can get a new job in a matter of days. This all happened on Friday and the construction site was closed till the next Monday. So, time goes by, cops never came, I got a new job in less than a week. More time goes by, 2 to 3 years, and guess who comes looking for a job at the same company I've been working for? Needless to say, it felt so good to see him coming to me begging me to give him a chance. We did take him in, only to fire his sorry ass one day before his probationary period was about to end. Story number 3. I was already job hunting and had an offer I was mulling over. I had been very unhappy at work and not performing my best. I received an email from HR that had zero context, just a link saying sign this. I clicked through and the top of the page said, employee separation dated the day before, and the prompts had me start at the top to fill out. I was in shock, then furious. I spent the next 4 hours transferring all my contacts to phone, cleaning up my computer, cleaning up my company car, and packing my office. I sent an email saying how disappointed I was. That was how they chose to fire me, but I signed their paper. An hour later, I ignored a call from my former boss. Apparently, they use the same form for every employee change, from separation to title change to supervisor change, which was what had happened. I waited until my boss texted me at 9 p.m. attempting to ensure I was coming in the next day to tell him I already had an offer and I think it's best for all parties if we no longer work together. I had off for a month, got a dozen phone screens, 5 new in-person interviews, and 2 more offers, and I knit a fun employment sweater. Story number 4. In plumbing company. After 2 years of being helper and asking about raise, I finally started doing service works on my own. Got a van truck, I bought all the tools for myself, and then I got $1 more, yet $1 per hour more. Took a week off, looked around for other plumbing companies, got job offer with $5 more than what I was making at the start, told my boss that I was quitting, showed him on paper how much I was going to make. He said he would match that with no problem. When I asked how come I never got more after complaining and asking for over a year, he just laughed. As I was walking away, he asked, "Hey, where are you going?" That's when I laughed and kept on going. I received some phone calls later on, even a voicemail asking to come back. He even offered more than new company. I sent over a recording of myself laughing again. Story number 5. Was working as an expat oil company senior staff geologist and de facto exploration manager, but without the increase in pay nor authority. Just increased stress levels in the Middle East for a Southern European construction company's oil and gas concerns. The general manager was a complete cuntwat, full of himself because he worked for one major oil company his whole benighted career as an engineer, so obviously he knows everything about geology, geophysics, petrophysics, etc. He didn't and doesn't is management style. If one could grace his screaming and infantile fuming as a style, could be described variously as inept micromanagement or management by objection. Would berate and degrade the entire staff in meetings with partners, which made everyone terribly uncomfortable to see such a lack of decorum and professionality. Scream so the whole office could hear. Over mundane idiocies such as lack of coffee pods in the kitchen or why 6,000 meters of pipe had never materialized, even though the unpaid invoice still nestled on his desk. He got in my goodie locker one day after a well was drilled but yet to be tested or completed based on my prospect and recommendation, looked somewhat dismal on the logs. Truth is, the well came in for over 8,000 bopped, and it was the Jake Leg and lowest bid, from whom he always took kickbacks, loggers that had fucked over the logs, and he absolutely refused my insistence to railog the pay zones. I was called just about every nasty name in the oil patch handbook, right down to the part where he told me my alma mater were a bunch of fucking idiots for granting me my 3 petroleum geology degrees. After 26 years in the patch, I decided that no job was worth this and laid plans for a quick, early, and entirely unannounced departure. I quietly related the fact that I was doing a runner to some of my other expat compatriots over drinks one Thursday evening and was greeted with the revelation that several of the other expats there were 1, thinking the same thing, and 2, if I left, they were gone as well. We carefully laid our plans. The company provided housing, paid a ridiculously low monthly fee, so we had to live in cheap-ass housing or sucked it up with our families and ponied up additional funds to live in decent villas. So we all gave clandestine notice to our respective landlords about our imminent departure and asked they keep it on the QT since they were paid by check 12 per year and were already compensated. They were both delighted that they had already been paid once and that they could rent out our abodes after we left for essentially double rent. Cancellation of internet, water and power were token, a quick email, print the automated response, and carry it with you if the border guards gave us any shit when we buggered off. Since we were all Western European, Canadian, or American, we decided to book a block of business class tickets, as was our contractual due to London. On the same British Airways flight, in fact, with families and all, we booked the entire business class section. We all had been in country for years and years, so arranging packing and shipping or storage of our belongings was a snap. We were all members of the move every 18 months to follow the money crowd. So this was the easiest part of our master plan. No one leaked a word of all this, but some of the locals in the company somehow sensed the change in the decorum of the company's daily activities. When one really doesn't give a shit, the stress levels magically evaporate down to near zero, and wondered aloud what was going on. We confided in a few of them. These were not just colleagues, but personal friends in many cases, with the proviso that they would tell no one, under the pain of bacon sandwiches. They were all Muslims, and they thought the threat hilarious. Like I said, many were and are still close, personal friends. The weeks dragged on, and school was about to let out for the summer when most expats bugger off for 1 to 3 months to escape the stupidly hot and humid Middle Eastern broiler season. So the usual requests for contractual time off were made and all roundly rejected by Herr Mr. Dickhead General Manager, and life proceeded on its merry way. Finally, Liberation Friday arrived, weekends being Friday, Saturday. At this time in this country, we contracted a local carrier and had a bus rented to pick up everyone and take us all to the airport. Luggage tagged and slept off to the bowels of BA letters, incomprehensible baggage handling, inner workings through check-in customs and passport control without so much as a sideways glance. We all invaded the English pub. After hitting duty-free one last time, we toasted each other on a job well done and best soon forgotten. A small company, total 50 or so total employees, could withstand the loss of 2 or maybe even 3 of their senior-level employees, but not this mass emigration. My good friends, whom we left behind, regaled us for months regarding the situation in the office come Sunday. Bloody Sunday. Once the realization of what had happened, the GM went completely off the rails, totally shithoused and completely berserk, or variations on that theme. The first glimmer of recognition of the severity of the rotund bailiff jeers about to descend upon him were when all calls to various abodes were answered with, "That number is no longer in service, please check." Emails went unanswered. However, our GSMs were still working, although we all blocked Herr Dickhead's number, though we still allowed text messages. Text 1, "Where are you? Why aren't you at work?" was just the beginning. In the words of Khan Noonien Singh, we let him eat static. Text 2, "Where the fuck are you? If you don't get you asses in here immediately," and other such impotent threats. Yes, please, I'd love another drink. Rising panic ensued. Text 3. "This isn't funny, come in and we'll act like this never happened." We all sat on the plane anticipating touchdown. By the time we hit London, it was 7 a.m. local time but 11 a.m. back their time. Herr Dickhead DM called an emergency meeting of the remnants of his staff, all locals, and demanded to know what they knew about this huge display of insubordination. To know, never heard a word, why, what happened, and where is everybody, were the responses. Herr Dickhead blows a gasket and immediately sacks everyone left in the office. Unfortunately, all that were left were a couple of T-boys who are always in demand and a bunch of locals. Due to the country's ization plan, it would be easier to fly a fully loaded 747 through the whole of a bagel than it would be to dispose of a local indigenous worker. Long story short, he couldn't and was instantly reported to the proper ministry in charge of such matters, as one of the secretaries was kin to the Minister of Employment Affairs. It's all wasta nepotism in this part of the world. Final damages: loss of 10 plus senior employees. Fines of over 5,000 reals day due to improper business practices, firing locals. Loss of 2 drilling rigs due to lack of personnel and inability to provide work as per contracts, and cessation of drilling of to active wells into the hole, so to speak, about us 3-5 millions each and 10 or 12 field development wells, so long cash flow. Loss of a 3D seismic contract worth approximately US 3 millions, adios exploration program. Loss of a rating, meaning you take a back seat to all who try and tender rigs, seismic crews, etc. Good luck sourcing all country tubular goods, logging or completion services, and pretty much all field-related activities. Loss of face with several ministries, no small item here. Huge importance is placed on competence and perceived amiability. Au revoir field development plan acceptance or seismic contract approval. Loss of 6 locals to the National Oil Company. Figured if expats deserted this amalgamation of idiocy masquerading as an oil company, they should bail as well. Ultimate temporary closure of the office, cessation of all field activities, payments of 150 to 200% on defaulted loans and contracts, and loss of several lucrative pipeline right-of-ways and transfer contracts. They had to continue to pay the still employed locals, basically sending them a check for sitting at home playing Xbox, and loss of 25% of the acreage due to non-fulfillment of contracts with the government. Last I heard, Herr GM Dickhead is thrashing around South Texas trying to sell some sort of jumped-up and shady oil deals with companies who have seen their own projects quashed by plummeting oil prices. Funny thing is, he keeps running into people, now on the other side of the desk, who both know him and in one or 2 cases actually worked for him. One receives a special gold-plated schadenfreude. When you lean ever so slightly forward and tell him to fuck off and don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out, you might suffer brain damage. What was your I messed up moment? Story number 1. I locked myself in an empty jail. I was reviewing a job site at 5 p.m. on a Friday, and I was the last guy there. My cell phone had just ran out of battery. It was a new county courthouse in the USA, and it was nearly complete. I was checking door functionality, mechanical function only. The whole building had electric security on each door, but it was turned off. I had a master key card and an actual door key to override the door locks just in case. At one point, I mindlessly walked into a side chamber of the main courtroom. I realize it's the D-Day lobby. As I turn back, I hear the door click shut. I tried the electric keycard that I had. It didn't work because no electric. I tried the regular key that I had and the lock didn't work properly. I tried again, nothing, and again, nothing, and again a few more times. It still doesn't work. I bang on the door and shout for help for a few minutes. It's useless, no one's there. I try the door lock a few more times. It doesn't work. There's approximately 60 hours until anyone was supposed to be at the job site again. I fucked up. I didn't want to, but I ended up kicking the door, and after a few minutes it broke. It broke around the lock, with the lock staying connected to the frame. Everyone laughed at me on Monday. Story number 2. Woke up in a hospital with my brother holding my hand while he slept in the chair next to me. I had been out for 8 days straight in a coma, basically drank to the point that my liver put up a temporarily closed sign and toxins were swelling my brain. Besides dealing with the doctor telling me that I have 25% chance of living for the next 3 months, in those 8 days all of my friends, family, boss, and ex met up and started putting the puzzle pieces together. Most knew I drank, but when they all got together, it was clear that I was an alcoholic. Together they learned that I had been on a 2-year bender with maybe 3 sober days in there, and had left to rehabs in the prior months. Suddenly I realized that I couldn't form a believable lie anymore. Fuck. I'm 303 days sober now, still have health issues, some untreatable like cirrhosis, some manageable like anemia, but I can finally wake up without my hands shaking, and I can sleep, really sleep. Before, my alcoholism was so bad that I'd wake every few hours because my body was giving me withdrawal symptoms. Most people can drink and have a good time without the nagging of an addiction. I cannot. If you can, celebrate it and pour a 40 for me. But if you think you might have a problem, consider exploring some sobriety programs or groups before you end up in these shoes. Story number 3. When I was 15 and new to acid, I got some for a day trip at a festival but didn't really get high off it, complained to my dealer, and he said he'd sort me out. Hours go by and at around 6 p.m. and he comes by to dose up the people encamped with. I wind up getting another 6 to 8 hits. Hours later, I was chilling at a big fire pit, waiting for my sister to go check out another stage, and my dealer appeared in a giant flame ball looking like a demon and said, "Look at you, you weren't getting high and now you're fucked," to which I replied, "Man, I'm so fucking high." My hallucination ended and I stopped mid-sentence, realizing everyone was staring at me. Decided I needed to go lay down in my tent but couldn't transition from the light to the dark because there were eyes in darker whispering at me that it was safe in the darkness. Eventually made the transition but quickly realized people in the camping area had set up tripwires everywhere. Spent the next hour or so dodging tripwires and made it to my tent, and spent the rest of the night watching a tree fold itself in half. Story number 4. I was cleaning our fish bowl. I dropped it into the sink accidentally. It cracked our kitchen sink. It was the type of sink connected directly to the counter. Because of this, no one would contract to cut out the sink, because it could have cracked into the counter, which they would be responsible for. So because of the crack, we had to replace every counter in the kitchen while we were at it. We figured we should refinish the cupboards as we always wanted to, and do a whole new backsplash of thousands and thousands of individual stones, and since we were doing that, we repainted the kitchen. However, as it flowed through the whole house, we had to repaint the whole inside of our home too, and since we were at it, we replaced our interior doors, but while doing that, we bought a new front door too, and since everything was moved, we had our internet and wiring in the walls redone and fished through the walls and ceilings. Story number 5. A few years back, I was hit a rough patch and was heading to my friend's place. Driving down the interstate, I zoned out, thinking about how shit my life was. When I came to, I was speeding like crazy, tailgating the guy in front of me. Then the highway trooper turned their lights on behind, pulled over, got a ticket for going 25 over the speed limit, which was a mandatory court date and I think $300 fine. When I finally came to my friend's house, I showed him the ticket and he asked, "Hey, did you change your name and age recently?" The trooper put the ticket in my father's name instead of mine, probably because my car at the time was in his name. Then I forgot about it. A few months go by and my dad wakes me up and says we have to go to the DMV. He called about getting new insurance and they informed him that his license was suspended. Then I no longer forgot about the ticket. I should have told him it was me, but I didn't. He decided to fight it, but I had to go to court with him to help translate. He only knew basic English. When the court day arrived, I was sweating bullets because if the trooper was there, they could have easily pointed out it was me who driving. Luckily, they didn't show, and the ticket and fines were dismissed. It's been 15 years and my dad still doesn't know. Story number 6. It's been years and I still remember I fucked up moment like it just happened yesterday. I was in college and had been dating this amazing girl for a few months. Things were going great, we connected on so many levels, and I felt like I had finally found someone special. One night, we were out at a party with some friends. I had a bit too much to drink and got into a stupid argument with her over something trivial. I don't even remember what we were arguing about, but I said something hurtful and completely out of line. Before I knew it, she stormed out of the party in tears, and I was left standing there in a daze, realizing that I had just fucked up the best thing that had ever happened to me. I tried calling her a million times over the next few days, but she wouldn't answer. I wrote her letters, sent flowers, showed up at her door, but nothing worked in the end. She never forgave me, and we went our separate ways. Looking back, I know I could have handled the situation so much better. I could have taken a step back, realized the gravity of my words, and apologized right then and there. Instead, I let my pride get in the way, and it cost me the one person I cared about the most. It's been years since that fateful night, but I still think about it from time to time. I've learned from my mistake and tried to always think twice before saying something I might regret. But the memory of that I fucked up moment will always be with me, a reminder of how easily one moment can change the course of your life forever. What was the most situation you've ever had? Story number 1. I was once in the bar, hopping college-esque part of our town with my friends. I was just getting over a bad breakup, engagement ended, and was going crazy drinking and dancing. I had brought plenty of 1-ounce shots in those bottles you can buy from the liquor store. It was a 10 for 10 kind of deal, and used them to get myself drunk without spending any money. Needless to say, I started eyeing a random girl I saw dancing on the floor. She was with a guy, but they didn't seem to close, rather more like friends. This friend of hers, mind you. He was super drunk. So she buys him another drink, and I offer to buy her one, but she didn't want one. Turns out he's a co-worker of hers, but they're not together. I thought that was it until she went back to dancing, and my drunk self went up to goof off and dance in front of her. Somehow, 45 seconds into dancing, we started making out. That went on for a few minutes with my friends filming and laughing, until they eventually left us alone. We both agree we need to release this frustration we have for each other. So we walk out of the bar and go to an alley that was right next to the bar we were in. I felt so badass. I winked at my friends and said to go on without me. In the alley, we started making out, and I stuck my hand in her pants. I somehow made her come real quick in just a minute or two just by playing with her. Suddenly, she asks if I want a blowjob. Mind you, we're in public in the middle of this alley, though there's no one else there. She unzips my pants and starts giving me a blowjob in the middle of the alley. Meanwhile, it turns out there's a back entrance to this bar, and people start walking in the alley in order to get to the back entrance, walking past us. Everyone pretended like we weren't there. It was funny. That might have been the craziest, most risky experience that was as close to a porn as it gets. 10/10ths would debate on doing it again. Story number 2. I had to take the Amtrak from Washington State to North Dakota, long ride. At my boarding station, I see a pretty cute girl, whom appears to be with her dad. I didn't pay much attention to them, more than exchanging glances with the girl. I assumed her and the dad were boarding the Amtrak together. Train starts to board, and I'm getting on almost last due to my coffee situation. As I board the train, I see the girl's dad walking back to the car lot by himself. Still didn't think much of it, but realize he was just dropping her off. I start walking the train aisles and quickly realize the train is damn near capacity, like almost no seats, except random middle seats that are being held for someone, according to every passenger. I keep walking, and much to my shock, one of the only open seats is next to said cute girl. I politely ask her if it's taken, and she smiles and tells me to sit. 2 to 3 hours go by, and we're chatting, and then she starts to get tired and lays her head over to my shoulder, snuggles next to my neck, and before I know it, we are making out and some light groping. She has a big blanket with her and covers both of us with it. I start to get very handsy and rubbing her down there and get a couple fingers in. She slides her hands over me, and I'm full sail at this point. She unzips me and pulls my soldier out and jerks me off under the blanket, and I make a mess of her blanket. She gently cleans me up with her blanket. All this happens while we have neighbors that appear to be completely oblivious this is happening. The huge blanket did a good job of masking her hand movement, but I imagine the guy pretending to read a book behind us knew what happened. We chat some more and she gets off at her stop. About 2 hours later and her family meets her. She gets off the train and attempts to shove the huge messy blanket into her bag. I laughed so hard at that moment. Awesome train ride. Story number 3. I went to a housewarming party back in the city where I went to college shortly after graduating. Because I moved out of town, I arranged with my friends to just crash on their couch. When the party is over, great time, everyone gets pretty drunk, and a cute friend from college shows up also from out of town. Let's call her Marissa. Marissa is also planning to spend the night on the couch. It's a big old L shape, so there's plenty of room for both of us. I always had a bit of a crush on Marissa, but she's had a European boyfriend for the entire 2 years that I'd known her. He came to visit her for a few weeks, so I know him and he is just an absolutely fantastic guy. I'd never try to hook up with Marissa, but if she makes moves on me, it would be hard to resist. Party winds down, everyone heads out, goes to sleep, and I'm about ready to knock out too. But Marissa says no, you have to watch the first episode of my favorite show, Shameless, which we had been chatting about earlier. So we start watching, get a bit cuddly, and I'm just enjoying myself and the show. We are well into the second episode when Marissa gets up, walks in front of the TV, stares me in the eyes, and takes off her pants. I say, "Holy shit," Marissa, thinking she just pulled the power move of the century. Snap back to reality, she starts to squat, and I realize this girl is drunk sleepwalking and about to pee on the floor. Again I say, "Holy shit, Marissa." I run over and get her to the bathroom. Still laughing about it a couple years later. Story number 4. I used to work at a restaurant and a colleague of mine slipped, spilling all the drinks over me as I was trying to catch her. Since my boss lived above the restaurant, he offered me to take a shower upstairs to clean myself up. I gladly accepted. However, this was never communicated to his wife, so she thought. Her husband was in the shower and decided to surprise him, so she snuck into the bathroom. It didn't have a lock, got naked, and pulled the shower curtains open in one quick motion, while striking a pose. To her surprise, it wasn't her husband that was showering, it was me. I also happened to be facing the shower curtain as she pulled it open. We both froze for a couple seconds and locked eyes. She closed that curtain as fast as she opened it, and apologized about 100 times on her way out of the bathroom. I just started laughing when she had left and fully realized what had just happened. I finished my shower, went back downstairs, and told my boss what happened. He bursted out laughing and asked if I liked what I saw. I answered with a yes, got a pat on the back, and just went back to work. Me and my boss's wife never talked about it, but my boss would sometimes tease his wife with it, when only us three were present. Story number 5. I was in the army and I was home for 2 weeks for my mid-tour leave from Iraq. Some of my friends wanted to go out to a bar for one last hurrah before I headed out of town again. One of my buddies invited this girl from his work to meet us there. She wasn't super hot, but she was attractive enough, wore the librarian glasses, and had like DDD breasts. I was pretty buzzed, and she kept talking shit to me, which I later learned was her way of flirting, and it pissed me off, so I left. Well, she got my number from my buddy and kept calling me back to back. I finally answered, and she says, "You've had too much to drink. Just turn around and come back to my apartment. It's closer," so that's what I did. Once I got to her apartment, she answers the door in just a t-shirt with no bra and panties. She's just standing in the doorway, and I asked, "So why did you invite me here?" She responds, "Why do you think?" So I gently push her against the wall and kiss her while shoving my hand up her shirt. She gasps, and then gave me a semi-hard slap to the face, but then grabs me by my shirt collar and pulls me into her apartment. She leads me to her bedroom, and right before she takes her shirt off, she tells me, "You're leaving for war again. You can do whatever you want to me." We proceeded to have the most just raw, raunchy, kinky sex for the next 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Made it back from Iraq about 7 months later and met up with her again. Lovely girl. What was something you saw you were definitely not supposed to see? Story number 1. I live in a courtyard with 3 apartment buildings. My building has 4 two-bedroom apartments. The landlady lives in another of the buildings in a 1-bedroom. Across the street, the landlady's son lives in an apartment building of his own. The apartment next door to me houses a couple, 33 male and 28 female, with their children, 10 female and 4 male. They're immigrants and have a long-standing relationship with the landlady. They pay a slightly lower rent and they manage the buildings when she travels, like 6 months out of the year. The guy runs a construction crew, so he does odd jobs and his wife stays at home. All this to say, the families know each other. There's a class difference which is important to these people, but they've been in each other's orbit for years. When I moved in, my neighbor was pregnant with a little boy. He's pretty light-skinned. For context, these peoples are of South Asian descent. Dark brown complected, lots of babies grow into their color, so no bae. For years later, he's still notably lighter than his cis and parents. My mom told me that there were rumors circulating about the kid's paternity, but I am not one to get into people's business or in that kind of drama, so I didn't pay attention. And then I get a look at the supposed father. This happens when the boy is probably 2. The landlady's son comes to see his mom, and I was leaving the courtyard. The little boy looks a lot like him. Most telling is the coloring they share. I would later see his own children. His son and the neighbors could be brothers. My mom makes friends with the neighbors, and we become somewhat close. I have my own baby. We interact regularly. One day I'm taking my daughter out in her stroller. I pop over to tell the neighbor I'm leaving, as I normally do. Her door is open, but her screen door is closed. She's sitting on the ground, staring up at the landlady's son, who is playing with her, possibly his son. The look on her face. I've never seen such naked longing and happiness on someone outside of the movies. I felt like I was intruding on a super private moment. Her eyes lit up, and she looked years younger. It was definitely a aha moment. He wasn't even looking at her, and I'm sure she didn't realize she had that look on her face. I quietly backed away without saying anything and left. She's never said anything to me about her son's paternity. But there was some scandal when someone sent a pic of the man and her son, side by side, to her husband, and the confrontation was apparently ugly. I look at her sometimes and I remember that unguarded moment and know that I definitely wasn't supposed to see it. Story number 2. About 2 years ago, there was a fire in a high-rise apartment building across the street from where I was living. My boyfriend and I had friends living in the apartment building, so we rushed outside to see if we could find them. From our house, we couldn't see which floor the fire was on, but judging from the smoke, it appeared it was close to the top floor. Anyways, the apartment was mostly evacuated, and we did finally meet up with our friends who were unhurt. We were standing around with the crowd when a woman ran up to the firefighters and shouted, "My daughter, my daughter." Someone caught her as she collapsed to her knees in the street, crying and shrieking. A paramedic eventually escorted her away from the scene to an ambulance as the firefighters brought out a woman strapped to a stretcher. We all thought this was the daughter, but then a firefighter came out of the 14th floor window with a small child in his arms. It was a young girl, and he carefully handed her to his partner to take down the ladder to safety, before disappearing back into the apartment as the second firefighter carried her slowly down the ladder. More than a few of us wondered why he was taking so long. As he neared the ground, a collective gasp went up from the crowd. The little girl was limp and looked as though she was asleep, but on closer inspection, we could see that her skin was gray-blue in color. The firefighter put the girl on a stretcher, and the paramedics began a half-hearted attempt at CPR to appease the crowd as they rushed to the ambulance, but they knew, as we all did in our hearts, that the little girl had perished in the fire. Not long afterwards, a stretcher was brought out of the building with a large man on it. He, too, was blue-gray in color. This time no attempt at CPR was made, as he was wheeled away to the ambulance. It was later reported in the newspaper that the man on stretcher was the girl's father. The little girl had been playing with the stove and had hidden in a closet. Because she thought her parents would be angry with her, he had died trying to save her, even though he had cerebral palsy and used a wheelchair. Story number 3. When I was in college, I worked at an arcade mini-golf joint that seemed to give zero fucks about actually making money but was never in any kind of financial trouble when I got hired. The owner literally said, "I pay minimum wage and I expect to get minimum work for it." I worked the front counter and collected money for the mini-golf and sold cups of coins, or you could just use the coin changer. The till was completely busted and would be off by $50 or more in either direction, no matter what you did. I realized very quickly that I could just pretend to ring up golf fees and cups of token S and pocket the cash, so I'd pocket $30 to $40 every shift and nobody seemed to give a shit. One of the assistant managers let me take a break 20 minutes after. I'd just taken a break because some of my friends had shown up and wanted to smoke a bowl with me. He was like, "That is totally more important than your job." It was awesome. Then one day I walked into the owner's office while his secretary was recording figures in the ledger. I can read upside down pretty well, and it was very obvious that the figures she was recording had fuck all to do with the business we were doing. We sold maybe $60 of golf fees a night and maybe $100 in coin cups, but she was recording $600 and $1,000 for each. I commented on the discrepancy and quipped about how someone would think we were in the laundry business, and she got really squirrely and told me to leave the office. The next day, the owner called me into his office, and we had a very circumspect conversation about how much I was enjoying working there and enjoying the perks of the job. And I very much got the sense that he was trying to decide if I was going to tell anyone anything. Apparently, he decided I wasn't, and so I kept working there. About a year later, the owner was arrested for money laundering, and we all got fired. Still the best job I ever had. The mob isn't a plus employer would work in fake business again. Story number 4. My dad once handed me his tablet and suggested I look at a book or something while we were sitting around in a theater waiting for a play to start. I don't know if I misunderstood him or what, because when I brought up his Amazon Reader app, I saw that the last book he had been reading was How to Deal with a Sexless Marriage or something along those lines. Dad was very embarrassed, quickly took the tablet back, and we did not speak of what had just transpired. Another time, Dad handed me his phone and asked me to look up something for him while we were sitting around the living room at a family get-together. When I opened his browser app, the last page open was porn. The video began auto-playing, and I frantically tried to figure out how to close the tab, but all I really managed to do was look at the video for far longer than I wanted to. So I shoved the phone back at my dad and said, "You need to close the tab. I can't figure out how. I'm sorry," and we once again did not speak of what had just transpired. There were also another couple of times where I went to use his computer and there was either a bunch of porn open in his browser or some kind of porn in the CD tray.